Hi everyone, Julie is here. I'm glad to see you on my channel Paradise of Russian. And I think that today's video will be Russian and Ukrainian writer Nikolay Vasilyevich Gogol. So let's begin. I have already mentioned in our literature video that if you live with Russia or for over a reason want to get it closer, then I advise you to get acquainted with a representative of Russian literature. And now we will get acquainted with the life and work of this writer, and in the meantime write in the comments about book that made indelible impression on you.
Nikolay Vasilyevich Gogol, or in Russian, Nikolay Vasilyevich Gogol, is a Russian and Ukrainian prose writer, playwright, poet, critic, publicist, recognized as one of the classics of Russian literature. He became the founder of a literary movement, the main stage of the natural school of the 30s, and had a huge influence on Russian and world literature. Mikhail Bulgakov, Fyodor Dostoevsky, Ryunosuke Akutagawa, Flannery O'Connor, Franz Kafka, and many others recognize Gogol's influence on their work. Honorary member of Moscow University. Nikolay Vasilyevich Gogol was born March 20, 1809 in Sorochintsy. He was named Nikolai in honor of Saint Nicholas. The writer's father, Vasily Afanasyevich Gogol-Yanovsky, died when his son was 16 years old. The stage activity of his father determined the interest of the future writer. Gogol's mother, Maria Ivanovna, was married at the age of 40 in 1805. She was exceptionally pretty. Her fiancé, that is, Gogol's father, was twice her age. In addition to Nikolai, the family had 11 more children. There were 6 boys and 6 girls in total. The first 2 boys were born dead. Gogol was the third child. The fourth son was Ivan, who died early. Then daughter Maria was born. All middle children also died in infancy. The last were daughters Anna, Elizabeth, and Olga. The influence of the mother is credited with the inclinations of that religiosity and that mysticism which by end of his life took possession of Gogol's entire being. Gogol entered the Gymnasium of Hydro Sciences in Nizhny. He was not a diligent student, but he had an excellent memory. In a few days he prepared for exams and moved from class to class. He was very weak in languages and only succeeded in drawing and Russian literature. The shortcomings of the school were made up for by self-education in a circle of comrades, where there were people who shared literary interest with Gogol. Comrades started their own handwritten journal, where Gogol wrote a lot in poetry. The death of his father was a hard blow to the entire family. The worries about business now falling Gogol. He must think about the future arrangement of his own affairs. Later he gave up her share in the common family inheritance in favor of the sisters in order to devote himself and to relate to literature. Later Gogol moved to St. Petersburg. Here he awaited a severe disappointment. The modest funds in the big city were completely insufficient, and the brilliant hopes were not realized as soon as he had expected. He tried to enter the stage, become an official person, devote himself to literature. He entered the assistant to the Ministry of Appanages, was the most junior rank, served for a year and a half. The service became unbearable to him. Nevertheless, from his experience in the service, Gogol drew material for his Petersburg stories. In St. Petersburg, for the first time, he kept the company of his fellow countrymen, which consisted partly of his former comrades. He found that Malorossia arouses a keen interest in Petersburg society. In search of live business, Gogol went abroad, but a month later he returned to St. Petersburg. He fled from himself, from the discord between his arrogant dreams and practical life. He was drawn to some fantastic country of happiness and reasonable productive labor, says his biographer. America seemed to him such a country. In fact, instead of America, he ended up serving in the third department. Later, literary acquaintances were made. Орест Сомов, Барон Дельвик, Петр Плетнев, Жуковский, Pushkin, which had a decisive influence on his future fate. He taught the institute and conducted private classes. Later, he was appointed an adjunct in the Department of History at St. Petersburg University. His first major literary undertaking, which laid the foundation for his fame, was Evenings on Farm near Dikanьки and Multiply novels. The complex intertwining of two cultures in one person always made the figure of Gogol the center of interethnic disputes, but Gogol himself did not need to find out if he was Ukrainian or Russian. The writer himself could not give an unambiguous answer to this question, learning towards the synthesis of two cultures. Until now, not a single work of the writer written in Ukrainian is known. Undoubtedly, Ukrainian features are reflected in the writer's work. These are considered the features of his humor, which remained the only example of its kind in Russian literature. He grew up in the eyes of his closest circle and, in general, of the young literary generation. Meanwhile, in Gogol's personal life, events were taking place that in various ways influenced the inner of his thoughts and fantasies and his external affairs. In 1832, he first came to his homeland after a long time. Staying at home first surrounded him with the impression of his beloved native environment, memories of the past, but went with severe disappointments. Household affairs were upset. Gogol himself was no longer the enthusiastic young man that he left his homeland. Life experienced him to look deeper into reality and see behind its outer shell its often sad, even tragic basis. Thanks to the influence of his literary friends, he was offered the same department at St. Petersburg University. He actually took this pulpit. Several times he managed to deliver a spectacle or lecture, but then the task was beyond his powers and he himself gave up the professorship. He works hard again, and these years have resulted in two collections of stories. For example, the story Taras Bульба was completely revised by Gogol. As a professional historian, Gogol used factual materials to build the plot and develop the characteristic characters of the novel. The main plot of the Inspector General, as well as the plot of Dead Souls later, was communicated to Gogol by Pushkin. The entire creation, from the plan to the last details, was the fruit of Gogol's own creativity. An anecdote that could be told in a few lines turned into a rich work of art. The old passion for the theater took possession of Gogol's to an extreme degree. The comedy did not leave his head. He was languidly carried away by the idea of becoming face-to-face with society. The production met a variety of obstacles, including censorship, and finally could be realized only at the behest of Emperor Nicholas. The inspector had an extraordinary effect. The Russian state had never seen anything like it. The reality of Russian life was conveyed with such force and truth that the whole society rebelled against him, which felt that it was about a whole principle, about a whole order life in which it itself dwells. But, on the other hand, the comedy was greeted with the greatest enthusiasm by those elements of society who were aware of the existence of these shortcomings and the need to overcome them, and especially about the young literary generation. Thus, the Inspector General split public opinion. Gogol decided to take a break from work by going on a trip abroad. Life abroad seemed to calm him down, gave him the opportunity to complete his greatest work, Dead Souls, but it became the embryo of the fatal phenomena. The contradictory reaction of his contemporaries convinced him of the enormous influence and ambiguous power of his talent over the minds of his contemporaries. This thought gradually began to take share in the idea of his prophetic destiny, and the use of his prophetic gift by the power of his talent for the good of society and not to its detriment. The idea of Dead Souls, in its final form, is nothing more than an indication of the path to goodness for absolutely any person. The three parts of the poem are a kind of repetition of hell, purgatory, and paradise. The fallen heroes of the first part rethink their existence in the second part and are spiritually reborn in the third. Abroad, he lived in Germany, Switzerland, and Paris, where he met and became especially close to Smirnova, and where he was calmed by the news of Pushkin's death, which struck him terribly. He was in Rome, which he loved extremely and became for him, as it were, a second home. He was attracted by nature and works of art, and Rome at that time represented precisely this interest. Raphael became the most appreciated artist of the old masters for Gogol. In 1837, in Rome, Gogol got acquainted with Russian artists, boarding officers of the Imperial Academy of Arts. At the time of the heyday of his relationship with Smirnova, Gogol presented her with Ivanov's watercolor, the groom choosing a ring for the bride. Gogol appreciated Ivanov and his painting the appearance of the Messiah to the people. He participated in the creation of a concept of painting, took part as a model, the figure of the one closer to Christ. He returned to Russia, where he was met by Aksakovs, who were enthusiastic about the talent of the writer. By the summer of 1841, the first volume was ready. The book was first submitted to the Moscow censorship, which was going to completely ban it. Then the book was given to the St. Petersburg censorship, and thanks to the participation of Gogol's influential friends, it was, with some exceptions, allowed. The last stay abroad was the final turning point in the state of mind of Gogol. He lived now in Rome, now in Germany, in Frankfurt, Düsseldorf, now in Nice, now in Paris, now in Ostend, often in the circle of his closet friends, Zhukovsky, Smirnov, Vygotsky, Tolstoy. A high idea of his talent and responsibility lying on him led him to the conviction that he was doing something providential. In order to expose human vices and take a broad view of life, one must strive for inner perfection, which is given only by divine thought. He writes a will, burns the manuscript of the second volume of Dead Souls. Gogol decided to go to a monastery and become a monk, but monasticism did not take place. It seemed to him that he understood how to write in order to direct the whole society towards beauty. He decided to serve God in the field of literature, and he decides to collect in one book everything he wrote in recent years to his friends. The 1840s is the time of the formation and demarcation of two different ideologies in modern Russian educated society. Gogol remained alien to this demarcation despite the fact that each of the two warring parties, the Westernizers and Slavophiles, claimed their legal rights against Gogol. The book made a heavy impression on both of them, since Gogol thought in completely different categories. Even his Aksakov friend turned their backs on him. The main goal in spiritual self-improvement, Therefore, for many years, the subject of his study is the works of the fathers of the Church. Gogol stopped halfway, not completely adhering to spiritual literature, Seraphim of Sarov, Ignatius, and others. He saw that it was possible to describe Russian life only in the middle of it, and by studying it, he intended to finally return to Russia. Even being in Jerusalem did not produce the effect he expected. Then he lived for some time in Odessa, was once again at home. He settled in Moscow, where he lived in the house of his friend Graf Alexander Petrovich Tolstoy, number 7 on Nikitsky Boulevard. By the way, in 1972, a memorial museum of the writer was opening in this building. As usual, he rewrote what he had written many times, succumbing to one or another mood. Meanwhile, his health was getting weaker and weaker. In January 1852, he was struck by the death of Ekaterina Mikhailovna, who was the sister of his friend Yazykov. He was possessed by the fear of death. He gave up literary studies, began fasting at Shrovetide. Once, when he was spending the night in prayer, he heard voices saying that he would soon die. At that time, a priest was visiting him. Difficult, sharp conversation took place between them. For example, the demand of Father Matthew, "Renounce Pushkin." Gogol invited him to read the white paper version of the second part of Dead Souls for acquaintance, in order to listen to his opinion, but was refused by the priest. Matthew became the only lifetime reader of the manuscript of the second part. Returning it to the author, he spoke out against the publication of a number of chapters, even asked to destroy them. And possibly over the reason convinced Gogol to give up creativity and began to fade a week before Lent. On February 5th, he has eaten almost nothing since that day. On February 10th, he handed Graf Tolstoy a briefcase with manuscript to be handed over to Metropolitan of Moscow, but the Count refused this order so as not to aggravate Gogol and his gloomy thoughts. Gogol stops leaving the house. February 11-12, 1852, Gogol woke up the servant Semyon, ordered him to open the stove valves and bring a briefcase from the closet. Taking a bunch of notebooks out of it, Gogol put them in the fireplace and burned them. The next morning he told Graf Tolstoy that he wanted to burn only some of the things prepared in advance for that, but he burned everything under the influence of an evil spirit. On February 18th, Gogol went to bed and stopped eating altogether. All this time friends and doctors trying to help the writer, but he refuses help, internally preparing for death. On February 20th, the medical council decided on compulsory treatment of Gogol. The result was a final exhaustion and loss of strength. In the evening on the same day, the writer fell into unconsciousness. Nikolay Vasilyevich Gogol died on the morning on the Thursday, February 21st, 1852, not having lived a month before his 43rd birthday. Gogol's work have been filmed many times. Composers composed operas and ballets based on his works. In addition, Gogol himself became a hero of films, TV series, quests, computer games, and other works of art. In Ukraine, the annual multidisciplinary festival of contemporary art Gogol Fest, named after the writer, is held. Streets and educational institutions in many cities of Russia, Ukraine, and other countries are named after Nikolay Gogol. Several stamps and commemorative coins were issued in honor of Gogol. More than 15 monuments to the writer have been installed in various cities of the world. Property case. The inventory of Gogol's property showed that after him there were personal belongings in the amount of 43 rubles 88 kopecks. The items included in the inventory were cast-offs and spoke of the complete indifference of the writer to his appearance in the last months of his life. At the same time, more than 2,000 rubles donated by Gogol for charitable purposes to needy students of Moscow University remained in the hands of literary critic from his entourage. Gogol did not consider this money his own, and the critic did not return it to the writer's heirs. The only valuable thing in the property left after Gogol was a gold pocket watch that had previously belonged to the poet Zhukovsky as a memory of a deceased Pushkin. At the hour of his death, Gogol had 150 books in Russian and 84 in foreign languages. This type of property was so insignificant in the eyes of the official appraisers that each book went for a penny apiece. As for the will and written notebooks, they were not in place already within an hour and a half after Gogol's death. Obviously, Graf Tolstoy butler Rudakov and Gogol's servant Semyon immediately after Gogol's death removed them from his room in order to better preserve them for his family and posterity. In 1930, the Danilov monastery where Gogol was buried was finally closed, and the necropolis was soon liquidated. On May 31, 1931, Gogol's grave was opened and his remains were transferred to the Novodevichy cemetery. This concludes my review, and before you is a list of Gogol's literature in English.
Well, I said so much, but you got a lot of stuff to talk about. Subscribe to my channel, mark the bell in order not to miss new release, and push the button if you like this video. See you in next thematic video.